Hi. The feature list of SampleTrek from Sonicware is very impressive. It's a sampler, looper, sequencer, it has a grid-based clip launcher, and it can record and play back multi-track audio in parallel to a scene-based song mode. It can process external audio and be used as an audio interface, and has built-in effects. However, its screen is very small considering the amount of information that's packed into it, and the capabilities of many of the features that I mentioned are rather basic. That said, similar products that can do more are typically more expensive, less portable, and take up more space. In this video, I'll take a look at what it can do in detail, including pros, cons, and alternatives. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Sonicware sent SampleTrek over for review. No money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. This channel is funded mainly by viewers who subscribe to exclusive content and book updates on Patreon, YouTube Premium and ads, and price check affiliate links in the description, which help the channel regardless of the product you choose to buy. Let's start with an overview. SampleTrek is quite small. It packs so many controls on the panel that it may seem large, but here's a Volca in comparison. The controls don't feel cramped, but the screen does in light of how much information is packed into it. It's 1.5 inches in diagonal, and I can cover about 2/3 of it with the tip of my thumb, or all of it with 2 fingers. So while I may zoom in tightly or use other video trickery to show you what's on screen during this video, spoiler, screen size is not one of the pros for this. Now, if we get over that, which I'm not saying we should, SampleTrek packs quite a punch in terms of controls and features for its size and price. The workflow is built around an Ableton Live or Bitwig or Logic Pro style grid, only if you're familiar with Live, it's been rotated by 90 degrees to the left, so scenes are from left to right instead of top to bottom, and tracks are top to bottom. The 10 tracks can be either audio loops or MIDI clips triggering sample-based instruments and drum kits, or sequencing external gear. And then all the way on the bottom are 3 additional audio tracks called global tracks, which can store song-length audio files for vocals or an instrument solo that spans across the entire song with 3 takes per audio track, and you can hop between takes mid-song. Aside from the 10 tracks and 3 global tracks, you've also got USB audio as an audio source if you connect this to an iPhone or a computer. And you can also mix in external audio coming in through the external inputs or the microphone. When you're in this home screen, you can see 4 scenes across and 6 tracks down, but projects can go way beyond to the right, up to 16 scenes, and down, like I mentioned earlier, 10 tracks and 3 additional global audio tracks. Maybe before we dive into the details, let's take a look at this setup and what a couple of example projects can look like. As I prepared the intro tracks, I worked on a few scenes, and you can launch a scene by pressing any one of these buttons, but to perform it, I just launched clips within one scene. You can launch an entire scene by pressing the scene button, or launch individual tracks in a scene by pressing the track buttons. This song has a few tracks. The loop style track, track 2, is a sample of the song's riff played by the red and black minilogue bass. So that's just a simple loop. Then on top of that, back to the home screen, I layered a MIDI clip, which sequences the actual minilogue bass on top of the sampled loop. Then below that, on track 3, I've got another loop. It's in one-shot mode for historic reasons, but it just plays this bass loop. And then my kick and snare are on 2 tracks and not in a drum track kit because you can't mute individual drums in a drum kit. And I wanted to be able to bring the 2 in and out as I played the song. Audio from minilogue bass coming in through the external input was then processed by the effects. You've got 3 effects slots here. An insert effect, which you can apply to just one of the tracks. Here I was applying it to the external input, the chorus on the minilogue bass. Then you've got another send effect. In this case, I chose the ping pong delay and I messed with its parameters. And if we go to the mixer, you'll see various send levels based on the different tracks and the input. I didn't use the master effect, but there's also one of a few master effects here. So all this is nice within the context of a clip launch style project. If I go ahead and load up a different project, this is one of the factory projects. It's got a few scenes. but it also has one audio track, actually with 3 takes, with 3 audio stems or takes that can play along with the song. Now, as long as you're launching clips, they don't play, but if you press the master play button, then the audio in the global track, the vocals in this case, will play along with the song. The song moves along with the audio tracks, and the scenes play from left to right. Each scene can be set to repeat a few times, and they don't need to be the same length. More on this in a bit. So that's pretty much what a project can look like with or without external gear. As far as the clip-based tracks go, there are some limitations on track types. You can only have 1 drum kit track and only 3 instrument tracks, meaning a single sample that can be played melodically, up to 8-note polyphony, by the way. So for example, if I head back to my project and go to an instrument track, then an instrument plays 1 sample polyphonically with up to 8-note polyphony, and you can transpose the octaves like this with these 2 buttons. They're a little bit hard to see, but they're here. The rest of the tracks can be either one-shots, loops, or MIDI tracks, and you can have as many of these as you like, up to 10 tracks in total. Aside from playing back samples, tracks will often let you automate additional parameters. So for example, MIDI tracks let you automate up to 4 CCs. So these are track parameters. Scenes also get their parameters, which you can access by holding function and pressing any one of the scenes. So let's say go into scene 5 here, the number of bars per scene, number of repeats, the time signature. There's support for multiple different time signatures, which is cool. And then if we go into clip parameters, say over here, then each clip can be up to 128 notes with different time divisions relative to other notes. So there's support both for polymeters and for time division based polyrhythms. SampleTrek has 15 velocity sensitive pads, which can be used either with instruments or with drum kits. Then these 16 buttons can be used either to launch scenes, or if you're sequencing things, say let's go into here, then you can use them to sequence up to 16 steps at a time across the clip. You navigate the interface as you've been seeing me do here using these D-pad buttons. You click OK to select, and clear typically goes back. You can often, but not always, do the same things with the value knob. So for example, if I go to edit parameters here, then I could go ahead and select parameters using the value encoder, press it to edit a parameter. But I can also use the D-pads if I wanted. Under the screen are 2 buttons, which may be a bit hard to see, but they're context sensitive to whatever is written above them. So say, for example, to move between the pages or move back in this case. And then these 4 encoders are also context sensitive, A, B, C, D, control the A, B, C, and D parameters on screen. They're also push encoders, so if you see a little arrow pointing down like you see here with the letter V in it, then it means that you can push the value knob to edit a different parameter, in this case the balance between the external audio and the project audio. In terms of I/O and connectivity, SampleTrek has a built-in microphone with gain control and a little LED to show you when you're clipping. If I go ahead and choose it as an external source, so as you can see, we can scroll through multiple options here. We get to the microphone and crank up the gain. Hello, hello. I'm pretty far away from the mic and you can hear. That's what it sounds like. So that's the mic. You've got instrument level, microphone level, stereo inputs, mono inputs, USB for an iPhone or your computer. You can sample from that, and you can resample audio from any one of the tracks, the global tracks, or the master, which is cool. These knobs control gain for the line inputs. The volume knob controls levels for the headphone output up front and the speaker. There's actually a speaker here. The speaker isn't great, obviously, but not too bad for its size. So if I point the microphone at it, it's not that bad. Aside from the 2 1/4-inch line inputs, you've got 2 1/4-inch outputs and 5-pin MIDI DIN in and out. On the right is an SD card slot supporting up to 32 gigabyte cards and a USB port, unfortunately micro USB, for MIDI transferring data and also for using SampleTrek as a 2-in, 2-out audio interface with your phone or computer. SampleTrek can be powered by 6 AA batteries you put in the back. The company claims over 30 voices of polyphony, which is pretty impressive. You can store as many stereo samples as you like on the SD card, and I asked the company if there are any limitations in terms of sample length that you can load into the project. They said that samples stream off the SD card except for the drum kits, where samples can be up to 2.5 seconds long. In terms of build, SampleTrek is all plastic. It's quite light. Most of the buttons and pads feel good and work as expected. The octave buttons are a little flimsy, but work fine. And while I typically don't have a problem with small knobs and the volume pots are okay, but the click encoders could certainly have benefited from being a little bit bigger and smoother to turn. The click encoders are okay if you're selecting one of a few parameters, but if you're editing a value, it just seems like it takes a lot of work to go from one edge to the other. I don't know if they can add maybe speed detection or something here. Anyway, everything else is pretty much okay, but these don't spark joy. While we're on the effects page, SampleTrek has 32 effect types. So quite a few nice options here, but you can only use one insert effect at a time on one track. So on the insert side, this feels very limited. And then there's, like I mentioned earlier, one send effect and one master effect that applies to all audio. And then to complete the overview, an important distinction needs to be made between song mode, or project mode as it's called here, and clip launch mode. If you just hit play, the project will start playing left to right based on the scene length and the number of repeats that you determined. So that's song mode, and like I mentioned earlier, that includes the global tracks. If you turn on launch mode, then you can launch individual tracks or clips in a scene by just pressing them. So for example, this and these two, which they'll get to at the end of the scene. Same goes for this, so you can quantize clip launches to the scene if you like. But if you like, there are a few other quantization options. So from scene down to 2 bars, 1 bar, all the way down to 1/4 of a bar. Let's talk a bit about sample management. Samples live on the SD card, like I mentioned. If you hit pool, you can browse through the SD card. Let's go for samples. Preset and pool are names for folders that hold samples that all the projects can access, and the project folder, as the name implies, holds samples within the specific project. You can also add pool favorites and project favorites, and browsing through samples is pretty simple. You just go through the folders, and you can preview samples. It's a bit tricky. You hit left, and then you see this little play there. You can play a sample. So that's how you audition samples. If you choose a sample, it'll kick you back up to the upper level of the folders. So if you just want to go through samples, I recommend favoriting them either to the project or to the pool so that you can easily access them from the main menu in the favorites later on. SampleTrek comes with over 1 gigabyte of samples, one-shots, loops, and drum kits. And of course, you can add your own onto the SD card. Unfortunately, there's no categorization, at least as of the current firmware. So if you want to, say, search for kicks, you have to go folder by folder and look for them. It would have been nice, obviously, if there was a search or some sort of category option here. The pool is also where you go to perform functions on samples. So when you select a sample, let's say go into here and, okay, let's choose that one. All the changes you make to samples, by the way, are non-destructive. So let's say if I want to trim a sample, then any changes I make to it will be saved as a new sample. There are a few nice trimming options here, by the way, so you can trim based on BPM to a number of bars, or if you like, just if you see this little V here, press the value encoder, change the trimming option, say to a beat point, then you can just trim the sample like this if you like. Let's take a look at the other options while we're here. Normalize will increase the level of the sample, also nice. Time stretch will let you take a loop and change the duration it plays without changing its pitch. There's both a melodic and a rhythmic algorithm in here. Now this is an offline process, so on some other sample players, this happens in real time. If you change the tempo of a project, it'll play samples slower or longer without changing their pitch. Here you've got to do it manually, and you've got to do it manually again every time you change the project tempo. Then the final neat option here is chop, which is actually a slicing option. So you can either slice samples manually or just hit auto slice. This will detect transients and let you play portions of the loop separately. And you can adjust these manually if you like as well. You can zoom in and out and fine tune these. However, if you want to actually chop up the sample, currently it will only create separate files for you or create separate one-shot tracks for you. What would be really nice if they did here would be to chop up samples into a drum kit. Now, aside from the factory samples on the SD card and anything you load up into it, you can sample directly using SampleTrek. Make sure you choose the source using function and source. Let's go for, we can do the microphone, or let's go for minilogue bass here. You can turn on the monitor, so you're not clipping with levels. I didn't mention this earlier. There's a tuner here as well, which is cool. Anyway, once we've chosen our source, function sampling, and just hit start. And we've got a sample. You can zoom into it and scroll across and basically just save it either into the pool or the current project. Once we've saved it, say into the current project, you can give it a name, but let's skip that. Now here we can either load it to a track or chop it up, slice it up. If we hit chop, then we can auto slice it, adjust the sensitivity if it didn't slice it up properly. Pretty good job. Or edit it manually. And again, unfortunately, you can't create drum kits, but let's maybe store it to a new project and assign the slices to tracks. Hit next. Let's not save changes to this project. And now we've got these one-shots loaded up into different tracks. Now, other than sampling, theoretically, you can also live loop into tracks. This was available as a kind of buggy feature in the beta, and I know they decided to remove it to release something stable, and they're going to add it in the future firmware. But if it works like in the beta, you'll basically be able to turn on looping mode, then press a track and live loop into it, though you won't be able to overdub, at least not in the version that I tried. Let's take a closer look at the different track types. I'll start with the loop track, hit edit. These basically play sampled loops. You can edit the start position if you like. And one neat feature here, you can pitch shift in real time. So if I hit play here, it's not that great, but you can go up to an octave down and up. So you do have real-time pitch shifting, just not real-time time stretching. If I go into track parameters on loop tracks, there's not much going on here. Let's move on to the next type of track, which is shot tracks. Now, shot tracks work in one of two modes. So again, shift and 5 here to edit this track. They either work in sequence mode or in just pad performance mode. Pad performance mode just lets you trigger the sample immediately. Then if I go ahead again and edit the track, turn on sequence mode. Then if I go ahead to edit this track, you can see that it's basically a sequence of triggers. So this is what I triggered in my pattern, and you can automate the play length, how much of the sample you want to play. Pitch, note velocity, that's how we get these declining decay-like sounds, micro timing, and overall level. You can use the step buttons to add and remove steps if you hit record. So now it's basically like a TR style sequencer. So yes, you can do 4 on the floor or 3 on the floor because I've got this set to 6/8, which is my project. To edit the values, you just choose the steps and change their value. Sample play length isn't that interesting, but pitch obviously is. So if we hit play, we can say go into here, edit the pitch of the different steps. And velocity, obviously important. There we go, if we want. And micro timing. So when you sequence live, and you can sequence live just by hitting record and say hitting the pad. So that's quantized to whatever the time division of the sequence is, but then you can go ahead and edit the micro timing of steps if you like. There's no ratchets here, but it's kind of a way to, I guess, get to something close to that. And level, I guess, is the overall level. And if you mess things up too much, you see this little thing here. That's an arrow with a B. I can barely see it. Just hit B. And yes, you can initialize the micro timing. Let's move on to the next type of track, instrument tracks. Sequencing here is very similar to sequencing the one-shots, except you sequence notes, you hit record, choose the step, and then add one or more notes to it. So that's our sequence, up to 8 notes polyphony, which is great. You can also transpose up and down to add notes in different octaves. You can also record it live, though everything is quantized to the grid. Like I mentioned, unfortunately, there's no micro timing when you record. Everything is quantized. But if we hit this little arrow up here, you can see we've got a few automation lanes like before, including micro timing, so you can adjust this later on if you want. There's no swing here. Note velocity we saw earlier. Level pan is cool. Send automation to the one send effect. So that's pretty much it in terms of sequencing for instrument tracks. Instrument tracks also have important sound design options. So if I hit shift or function and the track number, then you can select the sample, which I already did, to save us some time. Then there's position setting. So this lets you do the usual suspect, trim the start and end of a sample, say if I wanted to remove the transient. And you can also set a loop point. There's no crossfade time here. So with a decaying sample, it's hard to find good loop points. But if you mess with this, you might get lucky. It would be nice if they added a longer crossfade option here. Anyway, that's one sound design option. And then another one is envelope settings. So you can set a slow attack and a release. So short release, long release. Let's see what else is here. You can set the root note for the sample. If it's not C, you can change its pitch. I don't know why it doesn't work, but maybe I'm doing something wrong. There's a lo-fi mode. Doesn't do much as far as I heard. Maybe on different samples. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about instrument tracks. I don't have a drum kit track, which is a good opportunity to make one. You just go to an empty track, hit OK, and choose drum track. You need to first load up a drum kit, hit function and the drum track, then hit A to select a kit if you want a preset kit. Now, unfortunately, there's no preview for kits here. I don't know why, but there's no preview. Let's just go for hip hop kit. And then if we go to edit this, we've got a drum kit. Sequencing this is very similar to the workflow with the others. Just hit record, and then you can punch in steps if you like. And you can also record live. Things are quantized, like I mentioned earlier, but as we saw before, you've got a few automation lanes, velocity, micro timing, level again, pan, and send. If you want to create your own kits, just hit function and pool, and then select kit, hit new. This lets you load up a different sample per pad, lets you control level, panning. You can even reverse the sample playback if you want, and change its color. So you can change that around. Anyway, let's move on and look at MIDI tracks. As you may have guessed, sequencing them is, again, very similar to everything else. Just hit edit, both step sequencing and recording live. You can also sequence with an external keyboard, and automation here is for the 4 MIDI CCs, velocity, micro timing, and that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and dive in a little bit deeper into global tracks. I've loaded up the factory project just so we can have a look at this. So these work as follows. There are 3 global tracks. Global 2 and 3 are empty here. This is global 1, the one that's full. And within this track, we've got 3 takes. So the way these work is super simple. You hit play. You can see there are no vocals in any of the tracks in the beginning, so it takes it a while to start. And you can jump around if you like. And then you choose a take simply by going up and down 3 different takes, or you can mute a specific section. So here, for example, I could choose to not hear any vocals during this part of the song. Or choose maybe this take. Swap takes, pretty similar here. And if I wanted to create another split, I could zoom in, go around the timeline, and say create a split in here, and choose a different take for this part. So a very nice way to move between takes. And like I mentioned, there are 3 of these tracks, so 3 tracks and 3 takes per track. Okay, I'm back to my project. Let's take a look at the mixer. So there are 2 views here, levels view. We'll show you the levels for all the tracks. The disadvantage here is that, say the external source is all the way to the right. So you can only see a few of the tracks at a time. Anyway, we just go to a track and you can edit levels. And sends, panning. And then there's an EQ option per track if you press the D encoder. Now this is not alien inscriptions here. That's actually different EQ and shelf curves. If you can't see what it says here, just edit the EQ and you'll see the little dot move to show you which curve you're choosing. And then you press this encoder to edit the different EQ parameters. And then if I hit OK, you'll get kind of an expanded EQ page here. Where you can edit the EQ type. It would have been nice if they had a spectrum analyzer here, but anyway, this is how you edit the different EQ parameters. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the effects. So I've got minilogue bass going in through here. Let's go into the effects. So you've been hearing the chorus all along. This is with the chorus off, chorus on, flanger, phaser. Each of these has a page of parameters, but we're not gonna mess with these for now. Delay is an insert. Analog delay, vibrato, auto-wah, tremolo, ring mod, bit crusher, auto pan, isolator, WQ, compressor, back compressor, V-amp, crunch amp. Gotta mess with this a bit, right? And rock amp, metal amp. Bass amp. And that's it for the insert effects. And let's take a listen to the sends. I'll go to track 4 and make sure that my send level is pretty high. So you've been listening to ping pong all along. Reverse delay, tape echo. All of these again have their own parameters. And this can be tempo synced. Anyway, back here, room reverb, plate, hall, arena, tunnel, infinity. So those are the send effects. Let's turn that off and take a listen to the master effects. So this is our project maximizer. Emitter, multi-band compressor. These are its parameters. A cassette effect. Vinyl. So, those are the master effects. Before we head out to the pros and cons, I'll just mention that while SampleTrek only has 2 stereo outputs, a function to export stems is said to be coming in a firmware update, so you'll be able to export either the entire master or individual tracks or stems. Okay, let's talk about some pros and cons for SampleTrek. The most obvious and important negative thing to consider is the screen size. Even if SampleTrek had every feature and capability in the world, you need to be comfortable interacting with a screen that you can cover with, like I mentioned, basically 2 fingers or a thumb and a bit. Now, screen aside, top pros for this, in my opinion, are that once you have your content in here, and it's not that much fun to get it in, whether it's MIDI clips for sequencing external gear or sequenced audio and loops, then it's very usable to launch them using the scene and track launchers. Same goes, say, for playing a drum kit or even playing an octave and quickly transposing up and down. This portion of SampleTrek is very playable. The first type of competition that immediately jumps to mind is just a phone with a microphone, so you can sample on your phone, and there are some pretty good DAWs and sample flippers and sequencers on phones. Where you start hitting a wall with phones is connectivity, velocity-sensitive pads, buttons to launch clips, which are a big advantage over touch screens in my opinion. So if an iPhone and iPad with various controller and interface attachments don't work for you, I'm actually not aware of a lot of competition that can do that much in this size at this price. If you're willing to pay $100 or $200 more, the SP404 Mark II and Black Box are small, interesting, portable alternatives. Then if you're willing to pony up a bit more cash, the competition gets more intense, but a little bit bigger with the Roland MV1, Polyend Tracker, and for a bit more, the MPC-1 can do a lot more, MC707, Digitact and Polyend Play, and at an even higher cost, obviously the Akai Force and Machine Plus. Compared to all of those, like I mentioned, pros for SampleTrek are definitely price. Polyphony, by the way, pretty surprising here compared to similarly priced instruments. The multitude of track types, the fact that you have both long audio tracks and a clip launcher with shorter clips that can repeat and loop. There are very few instruments at or even a little bit above this price range that have such a variety of track types. However, each track type on its own is implemented in a relatively simple way. So yes, it has a looper, assuming that will be added as promised in a firmware update, but there are no overdubs. Yes, it supports sample playback, but not multi-sample instruments and very basic sound design functions. Yes, it has effects, but only one send effect, one master effect, and a single insert effect to use on one track, which is quite limiting. Yes, it has pitch shift, but not time stretch, and the offline process for that is tedious, not to mention you have to do it again if you change the tempo. I don't know if they can add real-time time stretching, which would be awesome, but until then I wouldn't really call this as something that has time stretch. Then in terms of sequencing, yes, it has step sequencing and live recording and a bit of automation, but no ratchets, probabilities, no generative features, or the ability to record unquantized, though you can adjust micro timing after the fact like I showed you earlier. There are a bunch of features that aren't in here, but I believe they'll add because they're pretty obvious. Things like note repeats, slicing to a drum kit previews. It would also be nice to be able to mute tracks in a way that would retain the mute status as you swap scenes, maybe by holding the clear button. Also, you can't edit quite a few things when a scene or song is playing, which is a bit limiting. I've not seen that on any other Grooveboxes. Typically, you can edit pretty much everything as the song plays. Here, you sometimes need to stop and edit parameters, which takes you out of the flow of making music. Then to wrap up the cons, there's no undo here, which many more advanced Grooveboxes have. And as I was testing this, I found quite a few bugs. Now, many were fixed within a day or two, but some weren't. And I'm sure I missed other bugs. But assuming Sonicware will fix those bugs and tweak the workflow a bit here and there, this could be quite a promising sampler, looper, and clip launcher for people with a modest budget, not a lot of space, or that want extreme portability. So that's it for SampleTrek. If you liked the insights in this video, there are plenty more in my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks available to the people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.